I used to believe that love, if given patiently and without conditions, would always find its way back to you. That was the woman I was then, soft, hopeful, trusting to a fault. When I married my husband, I did not just marry a man, I welcomed his child into my heart as carefully as one holds a fragile cup. And when his son grew up and married, I welcomed his wife the same way. I told myself that families are not made by blood alone, but by daily kindness, shared meals, and quiet loyalty. In those early years, I tried to be gentle in every way. I never wanted to overstep. I cooked when asked, babysat when needed, stayed silent when opinions were not welcome. I believed respect grew best when it wasn't forced. My own son had moved away by then, building his life carefully, and I was proud of him. Still, I missed him. The house felt quieter after my husband passed, and I learned how loneliness can hum even when the television is on. My stepdaughter-in-law filled that silence at first. She had a sharp voice but a warm smile in public, and I mistook that for sincerity. She spoke often about family values, about loyalty, about how blood should stick together. I nodded along, believing we were talking about the same thing. When her son, my stepson's boy, was born, I held him with trembling hands and promised myself I would love him as my own. I knitted sweaters, saved little envelopes of money, and attended every birthday I was invited to. But something always felt slightly off. Decisions were made without me. Holidays were already planned. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, not everyone shows love the same way. I chose to stay kind. I chose silence over suspicion. When my stepdaughter-in-law began managing the family finances after my husband's death, I didn't question it. She said it made sense, said she was better with numbers. I trusted her. Trust, I believed, was an act of love. Papers were signed quickly, explanations brief. I told myself it was easier this way. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be a burden. I watched her son grow confident, well supported, never doubting his place. I was happy for him, even when small things stung, like when he called her parents, real grandparents. Without hesitation, I smiled anyway. I always smiled. At night, though, I sometimes lay awake wondering where I stood, not out of greed or jealousy, but out of a quiet need to belong. I had given years, tenderness, patience. I had made myself small so others could feel secure. And still, I felt like a guest in a family I thought was mine. Back then, I didn't know that love without boundaries can slowly erase you. I didn't know that silence, when held too long, becomes agreement. I believed being gentle meant being safe. I believed that if I stayed kind, no one would hurt me on purpose. I was wrong, but I wouldn't understand that until much later, after trust had cracked, after words were spoken that could not be taken back, and after time itself had taught me the value of standing quietly but firmly in my own truth. The words didn't come during an argument. That's what made them hurt more. There was no raised voice, no dramatic moment, just a calm sentence spoken over a cup of tea, as if it were an obvious truth everyone already knew. "You're not real family," she said. She didn't look at me when she said it. Her eyes were on the sink, on the water running, on anything but my face. For a moment, I wondered if I had misheard her. At my age, hearing isn't what it used to be, and sometimes I miss things. I waited for her to laugh, to explain, to soften it. She didn't. I felt something inside me go very still. I had asked a simple question, whether I should be included in the discussion about the property my husband and I had lived in for decades. The house that held our memories. The house where I had grown old. I hadn't demanded anything. I hadn't even suggested a decision. I just asked to be part of the conversation. She dried her hands slowly, then turned toward me. That's when she said it, not cruelly, not angrily, just firmly, as if she were drawing a line on the floor and stepping back from it. "Everything is going to my son," she continued. "That's how family works." I remember nodding. I don't remember what I said next, only that I felt embarrassed for having asked at all. Embarrassed for believing I belonged. The room felt smaller, and I suddenly became very aware of how old my hands looked resting on the table. I went home that day and sat in the dark for a long time. I didn't cry right away. Shock has a way of numbing you before the pain arrives. I replayed the years in my mind, the meals, the babysitting, the holidays, the quiet ways I had shown up. I wondered which of those moments had counted, and which had never mattered. What hurt most wasn't the money or the house. It was the rewriting of history, the way she spoke as if my love had been imaginary, optional, temporary. As if I had simply been passing through their lives instead of standing beside them for years. After that, things changed without being announced. Invitations became rare. Phone calls stopped. I was no longer consulted about anything, not even small matters. When I did see them, I was polite, careful, smaller than ever. I could feel myself fading in their eyes, becoming a background figure, useful once, now unnecessary. I considered speaking up many times. I practiced sentences in my head late at night. But each time, something held me back. I wasn't afraid of losing what little I had left. I was afraid of confirming what I already knew, so I chose silence again. Not because I agreed, but because I needed time to understand the truth of my situation. Silence gave me space to watch, to listen, to notice patterns I had once ignored. I began to see how easily kindness can be taken for granted, how quickly people grow comfortable dismissing someone who never defends themselves. Slowly, my pain changed shape. It became quieter, heavier, but clearer. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped offering help that wasn't asked for. I stopped waiting by the phone. For the first time, I allowed myself to accept a hard truth: love that must beg to be recognized is not love, it is endurance. And endurance, I was learning, has limits. The years that followed were quieter than I expected, though not empty. I learned how silence can carry its own weight, how absence can speak louder than words, and how the world can continue turning even when you feel as if a part of you has been set aside. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval. I was simply living. I found comfort in small routines: early morning walks when the frost still clung to the garden, the gentle hum of the kettle, the scent of linen fresh from the sun. I filled my home with books I'd always meant to read and letters I'd never sent. Slowly, the quiet taught me something I hadn't realized I needed: that I could trust myself, even when others had not. I saw them less and less. Family dinners became rare events, invitations shrank to polite notes tucked in envelopes. When I did attend, I observed rather than participated. At first it stung. Watching them laugh, planning futures that seemed to exclude me, stirred the ache of betrayal. But over time, I noticed the little cracks that spoke louder than anger or resentment ever could: the way her patience with her own son wasn't always infinite, the carefulness she took to hide things I once would have known instantly. I began to understand the truth that money and inheritance had revealed: generosity is not always measured in wealth. Sometimes it's measured in integrity, in honesty, in the simple act of seeing someone for who they are. I started keeping a journal, writing letters I never sent. I wrote about my husband, about the warmth of his laugh, about the mornings when his hand would brush mine and the world felt anchored. I wrote about my disappointment, my quiet grief, and the lessons I was learning. I wrote to remember that my worth was not defined by their recognition, but by the life I had lived, the love I had given freely, and the dignity I had maintained. Time, I realized, was not my enemy, it became my ally. With it, the rawness of betrayal softened into clarity. I could see the choices she had made without rage. I could feel the sting without letting it control me. And as I watched, I noticed something profound: the more I let go of needing to be included, the more peace I felt. I also discovered that being calm, measured, and present could be a quiet kind of power. When family members came to me with small questions, or when her son sought advice about matters she had overlooked, I listened, offered gentle guidance, and then retreated again. No confrontation, no bitterness, only wisdom quietly shared. I realized that strength was not in proving someone wrong, but in holding your ground with serenity, letting life demonstrate its own sense of fairness. I grew comfortable with the fact that I might never receive the recognition I deserved from her. And yet, strangely, that absence opened a door I hadn't anticipated. Others began to notice me. Friends, distant relatives, and even her son's own children sought me out for stories, for counsel, for simple presence. My love, though once overlooked, had left a mark that could not be erased. 8 years had passed. In the silence, in the observing, in the slow gathering of self-respect, I had become someone I could trust, someone who could feel peace even in the shadow of betrayal. I no longer measured my days by their approval, no longer counted myself by the generosity they withheld. I had learned the quiet, enduring lesson of boundaries, of self-respect, and of emotional strength: that dignity, once embraced, cannot be taken away, even by those who claim you are not real family. The call came on a crisp January morning. My phone buzzed lightly on the table, and I almost ignored it, thinking it might be another routine notice from a solicitor about something trivial. But when the voice said, "This is Mr. Harwood, your lawyer. We need all family members present for the reading of your late husband's estate," something in me shifted. My pulse quickened, not with hope, but with the quiet, careful curiosity I had learned to carry like a shield over the years. I arrived at the office early, dressed simply, carrying only my handbag and a notebook I often used for letters I never sent. As I walked in, I saw her first: my stepdaughter, in law. She looked exactly as she always did, composed, precise, polished, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes, something almost imperceptible, like the first crack in a mirror. Her son was beside her, polite, unaware of the tension that hummed quietly in the room. The lawyer called us to sit, shuffled some papers, and then cleared his throat. "We will begin by reading the beneficiaries," he said. I could hear her voice in my head. "All those years ago, you're not real family." My stomach tightened for a moment, a familiar old ache surfacing, but I allowed it to pass. I had learned to breathe through the pain. Then he said, "The first beneficiary listed is," and I felt a hush settle in the room, like the air itself was waiting. Clara Whitmore. Her face froze. I saw her lips part slightly, the careful mask she wore falter for a heartbeat. The moment stretched long enough for me to see clearly what I had always suspected but never wanted to confirm: the truth could not be hidden forever. My name, read first, carried weight not because I sought revenge, but because it reflected years of quiet faithfulness, patience, and love that had never been acknowledged until now. The reading continued, and I listened calmly as the assets, accounts, and personal belongings were allocated. Her son received what was rightfully his share, modest but fair. But it was clear to everyone present that she had overlooked the quiet contributions I had made, the emotional labor I had carried, the years of commitment that had been ignored. The room was silent in an unspoken acknowledgement that life had a way of balancing itself, even when we didn't notice. I did not gloat. I did not speak harshly or confront her. Instead, I sat quietly, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. The injustice I had carried for 8 years had not disappeared, but it had transformed. Pain had become clarity, betrayal had become understanding, and exclusion had become self-respect. Later, when we all left the office, I lingered a moment to gather my coat. She avoided my gaze, small apologies hovering on her lips but never forming words. I smiled gently, not with triumph but with peace. I did not need her validation. I did not need her recognition. The law had merely formalized what I already knew in my heart. My value was never defined by her words or actions. It was inherent, quietly cultivated over decades. Walking back to my car, I felt the winter sun on my face and thought about the long journey that had brought me here, the betrayal, the silence, the patient observation, and the quiet fortitude that had replaced hurt with dignity. The lesson was simple, and yet profound. Emotional strength is measured not by confrontation or revenge, but by knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and carrying yourself with unwavering self-respect. By the time I drove home, I realized that the deepest satisfaction in life comes not from forcing recognition, but from quietly living in a way that your integrity cannot be denied. I had given everything I could: love, patience, understanding, and in return, life had given me something equally precious: inner peace, dignity, and the serene knowledge that, despite betrayal, I had remained true to myself. Sometimes I think about her, still clinging to what she considered control, and I feel nothing but gentle empathy. I am free now, my heart is steady, my hands, once trembling with hope and doubt, now rest lightly on the steering wheel. And I know with quiet certainty that some victories are quiet, some justice is unseen, and the most profound strength is the one carried softly from within.